Welcome to an I Write Radio special interview with the local MP for Edinburgh North and Leith, Deirdre Brock. Welcome to our show, Deirdre.
Hi there.
I hope you're well today. I'd like to, we're going to cover a few things. One of them will be the trade bill, which you have a particular responsibility for with this possible trade bill with the USA. Possibly we might cover, there's a question about how much work, or if there was any cross-party working at all, or advice for Scottish MPs with regard to the coronavirus at all, or whether you've been left out in the cold down there. However, before we go any further, can I ask you, have you got any more information about Amy Callahan? Because
No, I don't, unfortunately. You know, it's really all operating out of her office. It was a real shock to hear that was happening, but that happened to her. She's such a terrific, you know, really gutsy woman, and so it's so sad to hear that, you know, she's having to cope with another setback. But knowing her, I'm sure she'll be, you know, battling through this and getting over it as soon as she possibly can. She's, you know, she's a real loss actually for us down there, because, you know, she's just really determined. She's such a determined lass, and she is never frightened to speak her mind either. And she was, you know, it's always good to have young people around as well, just reminding you different viewpoints.
Anyway, if you do get, if you can pass her on my best.
I will. I know. I mean, everyone's rooting for her. You know, we're all.
We can be back with us soon. So let's kick off with the trade bill that's shuffling around in the House of Commons. Is it also in the Lords at the moment, or is that to follow?
It's coming. It was just at its second reading, so no, it's still got to go through the Commons and then it'll go up to the Lords. But
right. Well, let's start off with the contentious thing. Well, let's see. As far as we know, this potential trade bill will mean that American companies will be able to take the UK authorities and the UK companies to some secret court and impose restrictions and charge, well, to take them to court and extract penalties. Now, why are the 6 Scottish Tory MPs abandoning their constituents? Don't they all represent farming constituencies, and don't the farmers back the Tories?
Yeah, it's been very interesting. I mean, there was so much concern from agricultural communities over their approach to the recent agriculture bill, and that clause that was put up by a member of the Tory party, in fact, a sort of rebel clause, if you like, but not a particularly rebellious figure normally, Neil Parish, who is the chair of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, and yet none of the 6 Tories, Scottish Tories, voted for that clause, although about 20 Tories actually rebelled against the government and voted for it. Unfortunately, it didn't make it through because not enough of the Tories decided to support it. I don't know where they're coming from here. They have had a huge backlash. I mean, I'm thinking particularly of publications like the Farmers Weekly, and they've run several opinion pieces and articles just criticising the Scottish Tories enormously for their stand on this, because if you don't have something in legislation saying that the equivalent standards are expected of any food imported into this country as a result of future trade deals that might be struck by the UK, then negotiators don't have that sort of backup, if you like, when they go into negotiating rooms. And the real concern is, and frankly, given the US track record, for example, in trade negotiations, the real concern is that they'll just buckle. And that'll be one of the things that, you know, we'll be forced to accept as part of any future US-UK trade deal. We know how much aggressive lobbying's been going on from the agri-food sector in America. They want access to the UK market, and it will not be about them changing their standards to suit us.
No, no, okay. Well, can I just, I mean, I still want to find out if there's any logical answer at all to why they are effectively shooting themselves in the foot, these 6 Tory MPs. Of course, they do sit in a parliament that's liable to sit for the nearly 5 years with an 80-seat majority. So I don't suppose it matters if they don't have to face their constituents again.
Yeah, I expect that's a consideration, you know, realpolitik and all that.
I mean, so are they on the take then? Is it financial interest that makes them vote this way?
You know, I mean, I wouldn't be able to comment on that. I wouldn't know one way or the other, to be honest with you, Stewart. And I think
are they going to get seats on the board of American food companies?
Who knows? I mean, you know, Liz Truss, people like Liz Truss, who's the Secretary of State for DIT, she's always talking about the opportunities. So maybe she's talking about personal opportunities. I have no idea. But no, it's a pretty extraordinary situation. And I think I've been struck by how upset certainly journalists in the farming journals are, and certainly the viewpoints we're getting back from bodies like the NFUS, for example. Their concerns are being very strongly expressed.
Okay, well,
you might be right. They maybe just don't care because they're not going to have to face an election for a while.
Well, if that, regardless of that part of the argument, why, or is there much, is there much in the regular media? I don't come across much on the Scottish TV or national press screaming on behalf of the farmers, attacking these 6, you could call them traitors.
Well, actually, I've got some press. I'm on the front page of the National today talking about the Supine Six.
Yes, I'm sorry. I should have mentioned that.
Yeah, that it'd be interesting to see if that sticks. That particular description. But yeah, to say I'm disappointed in their approach to this is, yeah, I can't really go there. And it's just going to be interesting to see if this is actually ultimately going to affect the way people look at the Conservative Party in some of those areas that have been traditionally Tory supported.
Yeah, but I mean, the trouble is, how angry are constituents going to get if they don't know just what these MPs are doing?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Stuart. We had obviously we've had many. I mean, I've had a huge increase in email traffic and people getting in contact from the constituency. And one of the topics that is absolutely top of the pile in terms of numbers is around food standards. We've had many dozens of emails in about that. People are really upset about it. So it might not necessarily be appearing in some of the sort of the larger newspapers as a topic, but I can tell you there's plenty of interest in it on the ground. I've been struck actually by how many emails we've had in on this.
Oh, I think, I mean, there is of course a constituency, a broad constituency rather than your one, for food standards and animal welfare standards and that. And
yeah.
if you think back,
environmental standards, yep, absolutely.
If you think back only 20 years, the animal rights movement was more, let's be honest, they were more radical and more militant than any Scottish independence group has ever been. So that's a thought. And shall we move on?
Yes.
Yesterday we had an American warplane crashed off the Yorkshire coast, and it's based in Lakenheath in England. Now, over the last couple of years, President Trump has demanded payment for his forces to be based in Korea, in Japan, and a number of other countries. So who actually pays for the Americans to be allowed to have their jets parked in England? And why do we pay? Does the UK pay? Do the Americans pay the UK? I mean, I know, for example, at Faslane, there are so-called British nuclear weapons which actually aren't. They're American built and they're under American control, and yet I presume we have to pay for them. So
yes, we do have to pay for the nuclear weapons. You'll be aware of the nuclear, the sort of the renewal program, which is
the Trident program,
alarming amounts of money.
Yes, the Trident upgrade program.
Yes, which is still, last I heard, I think it was about, the estimate was it was £2 billion over their last projection. It just seems to be going up and up and up. And, you know, as a long-term member of Scottish CND, I would like to see these removed from Scottish soil as quickly as possible. In terms of the Americans' financial involvement, I mean, I think this is really just accepted as part of the special relationship. I'm not entirely sure. I'd probably have to check with my colleague who speaks for us on defence matters.
Look, it just occurred to me when I noticed that, I don't know, I'm sorry if there's the pilot lost his life yesterday. I don't know. Right. I'm not sure. I'm not up to speed on that.
No, I don't know that. No.
I wouldn't want to be difficult about that.
No, indeed. No.
But I mean, we've had Trump demand payments for all the troops sitting in Korea, all the various countries. Oh, you know, you've got the benefit of our troops being there. Well, why on earth would we pay for American warplanes to be based in England? I don't understand that at all. Who are we going to attack? Who's going to attack us? The French?
No, I'm not disagreeing with you, Stewart. I think if there are payments exchanging hands, you know, it's not something I've heard of, I have to say. But okay. Like I say, I can always double check that with Stewart. I mean, you might want to think about doing a whole section on defence with my colleague Stewart MacDonald. He's very good on this. I mean, in terms of
Stewart, I'm going to be risky. He comes across as very right wing.
Oh. No, I don't think he'd.
Awfully close to the military and the defence people.
Well, you know, I mean, I suppose when you do a brief, you have to become familiar with the arguments, and I think that's what Stewart does very effectively. I mean, he certainly exposed a lot of things then to do with the MOD that I'm sure they didn't want exposed, so I wouldn't describe him as right wing.
I'm not always certain just because something is exposed. Sometimes they want things to be exposed a bit like having a dead cat on the table, you know, that one?
Well, oh yeah, there's definitely that for sure. But, you know, I'm thinking about, I asked some questions of the MOD about nuclear safety accidents at Fastlane and Coalport. And we got quite a lot of press coverage of the fact that, you know, hundreds, I think it was more than 500 safety mishaps had been recorded since 2006. And the MOD took it upon itself to stop publishing nuclear safety reports in about 2014, I think. And were given sort of big raps on the knuckles by the Office for Nuclear Regulation, for example, as a result of that.
I think we've come to that time of year. I may have to, it's possibly the annual protest outside Fastlane.
Yeah.
I might go again, with social distancing, of course.
Yes, I know. Absolutely. Yep.
Well, I've got an odd link for us here. My very first published political document was my dissertation at university, and it was titled "What Makes a CND Activist?" Now, this was in 1982, at the time of Greenham Common, and a lot of listeners won't know what was done at Greenham Common in 1982. The Americans insisted on, with Maggie Thatcher's help, on basing, I think it was something like a dozen nuclear ballistic missiles based at Greenham Common Base in the south of England. And basically what they did, they drove out every morning and in all kind of strange directions all across southern England, so that if they fired their missiles, they couldn't be targeted principally by Russia. But it became an enormous big issue. CND became incredibly popular. Women surrounded the base, linked arms, and it became a huge thing. And at the time, my dissertation was about looking at careerists joining CND, because CND was fashionable at the time. And to some extent, I could see that I didn't realize that's what I was going to see when I started the research for my dissertation, but I discovered that. So I'm going to link back from that to 2007, when the SNP first came into power in Holyrood. And at that point, and that's something that Norrie, amongst others, and we discussed at the time, we could see that the Careerists were young, thrusting people with ambition at the universities. They were going to start joining the SNP rather than the Labour Party or the Tories. And right now, we seem to have got an SNP party with an awful lot of these people in it who don't seem to be particularly interested in independence.
Well, that's not, I can't say that's my experience, Stuart, in terms of some of the young people like, well, Mari Black, for example, who I can assure you is very interested in independence, and indeed Amy as well. I think, a party's success does sometimes encourage interest from young people that might otherwise not have been interested, but certainly many of the young people, I mean, I'm an old fogey. I've been in the party for, 20 odd years. I think I joined in 98, 99, when we were a long way away from ever thinking that we would be able to get into a position of government. But, I mean, yes, that accusation could be leveled at any political party, I guess. There are some also very, very talented, very bright young people in the party as well who are working their backsides off on behalf of the independence cause. So,
Right. Well, I was hoping that this might be an explanation for the lack of momentum towards independence. I mean, it's now, we're 6 years this year, since 2014, in this September. We see very little momentum from leadership at the SNP towards achieving the independence of Scotland.
At the moment, obviously, because
of the failures of the UK government at the moment. Could this not be a better time than now to point out to the voters of Scotland, wouldn't you be better off run by the people of Scotland?
Well, I think that is something that we tend to make an argument for on a very constant basis, Stuart. So certainly something that is constantly mentioned down in Westminster, and much
but not always at the conferences, apparently. I mean, last year's conference, it was sidelined, the idea of moving forward.
I don't know. I mean, it's the party's raison d'etre. I mean, everything in the party revolves around the fact that we think independence would be better for Scotland and for the people of Scotland. So I think calls for us to, when there are still so many people yet to be convinced, this is my issue. I mean, I went and hit a lot of doors in 2019 at this last election, and I saw for the first time really a big, I would almost say a majority of the people whose doors I knocked actually actively considering independence in a way that I'd never seen. I've knocked lots of doors and lots of elections. They're not, many of them are not quite there yet. And this was remembered just because of the conditions that Brexit had brought about, if you like. I imagine many more of them have shifted now because of the mishandling of the COVID crisis under Westminster. But still, the opinion poll, the latest one from James Kelly, I think it was, had us at 52%. I think, you can't force this decision onto people. The people have to make their own minds up. We still have a lot of persuading to do, and I don't think campaigning for independence ever stops with anyone within the SNP, or at least it shouldn't. I mean, it's certainly, at the back of my mind with everything I do down there. So
how did you get on with, say, Angus Brendan McNeill?
Oh, Angus. Oh, well, he's a Gael. My kids both went to Gaelic medium. So
well, I discovered
I try a little bit of my Gaelic, and he does his best not to wince.
All right. I discovered recently my father had the Gaelic, though he never spoke it to me.
Really? That's unfortunate. Yeah, there is a whole.
I think it was beaten out of him. So
no, a lot of generation.
You are aware there is a lot of frustration at the lack of momentum towards independence. Now, some people say that now is not the time, Well, fair enough. It's not the time exactly now, but the Tories don't seem to look at it that way. They've been campaigning against independence non-stop for the last 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've been defending our position against that, I would argue. Look, I get frustrated. Like I say, I've been in the party for over 20 years. I would like to have seen it. I mean, I'm gutted. I was gutted when we didn't win the 2014 referendum. But I don't see that the quick and easy solutions that people sometimes like to focus on don't seem to me to be quick and easy solutions. And they seem to me to bring in quite a lot of problems, because we'd have to be justifying what we're doing, and we wouldn't have people with us. And I think that is, to me, vital. And I think talking within a sort of a fairly small group of people who all think the same way is good, but who's getting out there and knocking on the doors and actually talking to folk and seeing what they think? Because I am doing that, or I have been doing that, and the impression I got is that people are not quite there yet. They're ready to consider it, and I think what we have to do is keep moving forward and aiming for a referendum one day.
But is there any point knocking on the doors when the media is so biased in Scotland?
Yes, I would say broadly, being diplomatic, the media are not, for the most part, friends to the independence cause, and you know that has been that way for a very long time. I think it's interesting seeing the difference that social media is making in spreading a different point of view much more widely, and I think I would suggest that a lot of the issues that were discussed in the run-up to the 2014 referendum are, as a result of social media and more discussion there, more information getting out there. I think people are more broadly aware of some of what lay behind some of the nonsense that went on from the Better Together side, for example, in the run-up to that referendum.
Well, you could say, for example, at the moment, think back to 2014, the idea was the broad shoulders of the United Kingdom, safety, all the rest of it. Nowadays, I don't think you could get away with that argument, could you?
No, you couldn't. I think people would laugh at that now. I mean, that argument is gone. You've got a man in charge who is viewed with a huge amount of contempt based on what I was hearing on the doors anyway. People were despairing at the notion of Boris Johnson being in charge, and he's surrounded himself with a cabinet of people who are, again, being diplomatic, extremely unimpressive. They are not capable ministers. And so, I mean, I met, for example, Tory voters in that last election who just looked at me in despair. They said, I do not know who I am going to vote for in this election, because they couldn't stand Boris Johnson and what he represented.
Look, you brought up the Tories.
I suspect they didn't vote at all, actually.
Well, getting towards the end of this interview, let's
right.
you brought up the Tories there. Has there been any approach down at Westminster to bring in the likes of the expertise of MPs like Philippa Whiteford? Is there any cross-party working, looking for any advice from that kind of?
Well, I don't think that's. It's really the job of the scientists to be providing that advice. I mean, Philippa is such an asset to our party. I mean, she is, you will have seen her on a lot of broadcast media recently, because she has a brilliant way of explaining quite complex issues in a way that, people like myself, lay people who aren't involved in the medical profession at all, can find easily understandable. So she's been doing a brilliant job there.
Yeah.
Hey?
You're right there.
Yeah.
She puts
but,
it
it's the job of the scientists, the virologists and the epidemiologists to then give advice to ministers, and the ministers are probably the ones who decide on those sorts of issues. But, Philippa, what a woman she is. She's brilliant. Love her to bits.
Well, I think we should wind it up there, Deirdre. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And,
it's lovely to see you.
Thank you very much for coming on. I hope we can do this again. And you've been listening to I Write Radio, an interview with myself, Stewart Lochhead, with Deirdre Brock. And I'd just like to say thank you for listening, everybody, and goodbye, Deirdre, and goodbye to everybody else.
All right.
Goodbye.
See you. Thanks. Bye.